Concerning the Beautiful by Plotinus. Translated by Thomas Taylor. Read by Dan Attrell. If you'd like to support more work such as this, please visit patreon.com/themodernhermeticist. Concerning the Beautiful. Beauty, for the most part, consists in objects of sight, but it is also received through the ears by the skillful composition of words and the consonant proportion of sounds. For in every species of harmony, beauty is to be found. And if we rise from the sense into the regions of the soul, we shall there perceive studies and offices, actions and habits, sciences and virtues, invested with a much larger portion of beauty. But whether there is above these a still higher beauty will appear as we advance in its investigation. What is it then which causes bodies to appear fair to the sight, sounds beautiful to the ear, and science and virtue lovely to the mind? May we not inquire after what manner they all partake of beauty? Whether beauty is one and the same in all? Or whether the beauty of bodies is of one kind, and the beauty of souls of another? And again, what these are, if they are two? Or what beauty is, if perfectly simple and one? For some things as bodies are doubtless beautiful, not from the natures of the subjects in which they reside, but rather by some kind of participation. But others again appear to be essentially beautiful, or beauties themselves, and such is the nature of virtue. For, with respect to the same bodies, they appear beautiful to one person, and the reverse of beauty to another, as if the essence of body were a thing different from the essence of beauty. In the first place, then, what is that which, by its presence, causes the beauty of bodies? Let us reflect what most powerfully attracts the eyes of beholders, and seizes the spectator with rapturous delight. For if we can find what this is, we may perhaps use it as a ladder, enabling us to ascend into the region of beauty and survey its immeasurable extent. It is the general opinion that a certain commensuration of parts to each other and to the whole, with the addition of color, generates that beauty which is the object of sight, and that in the commensurate and the moderate alone, the beauty of everything consists. But from such an opinion the compound only, and not the simple, can be beautiful. The single parts will have no peculiar beauty, and will only merit that appellation by conferring to the beauty of the whole. But it is surely necessary that a lovely whole should consist of beautiful parts, for the fair can never rise out of the deformed. But from such a definition it follows that beautiful colors and the light of the sun, since they are simple and do not receive their beauty from commensuration, must be excluded from the regions of beauty. Besides, how, from such an hypothesis, can gold be beautiful, or the glittering of night and the glorious spectacle of the stars? In like manner, the most simple musical sounds will be foreign from beauty, though in a song wholly beautiful, every note must be beautiful, as necessary to the being of the whole. Again, since the same proportion remaining, the same face is to one person beautiful, and to another the reverse, is it not necessary to call the beauty of the commensurate one kind of beauty, and the commensuration another kind, and that the commensurate is fair by means of something else? But if transferring themselves to beautiful studies and fair discourses, they shall assign as the cause of beauty in these the proportion of measure, what is that which in beautiful sciences, laws, or disciplines is called commensurate proportion? Or in what manner can speculations themselves be called mutually commensurate? If it be said because of the inherent concord, we reply that there is a certain concord and consent in evil souls, a conformity of sentiment in believing, as it is said, that temperance is folly and justice generous ignorance. It appears, therefore, that the beauty of the soul is every virtue, and this species of the beautiful possesses far greater reality than any of the superior we have mentioned. But after what manner in this is commensuration to be found? For it is neither like the symmetry in magnitude nor in numbers, and since the parts of the soul are many, in what proportion and synthesis, in what temperament of parts or concord of speculations does beauty consist? Lastly, of what kind is the beauty of intellect itself, abstracted from every corporeal concern, and intimately conversing with itself alone? We still therefore repeat the question, what is the beauty of bodies? It is something which at first view presents itself to sense, and which the soul familiarly apprehends and eagerly embraces as if it were allied to itself. But when it meets with the deformed, it hastily starts from the view and retires abhorrent from its discordant nature. For since the soul in its proper state ranks according to the most excellent essence in the order of things, when it perceives any object related to itself, or the mere vestige of a relation, it congratulates itself on the pleasing event, and astonished with the striking resemblance, enters deep into its essence, and by rousing its dormant powers, at length perfectly recollects its kindred and allies. What is the similitude, then, between the beauties of sense and that beauty which is divine? For if there be any similitude, the respective objects must be similar. But after what manner are the two beautiful? For it is by participation of species that we call every sensible object beautiful. Thus, since everything void of form is by nature fitted for its reception, as far as it is destitute of reason and form, it is base and separate from the divine reason, the great fountain of forms, and whatever is entirely remote from this immortal source is perfectly base and deformed. And such is matter, by which its nature is ever averse from the supervening irradiations of form. Whenever, therefore, form accedes, it conciliates in amicable unity the parts which are about to compose a whole. For being itself one, it is not wonderful that the subject of its power should tend to unity, as far as the nature of a compound will admit. Hence the beauty is established in multitude, when the many is reduced into one. And in this case it communicates itself both to the parts and to the whole. But when a particular one, composed from similar parts, is received, it gives itself to the whole, without departing from the sameness and integrity of its nature. Thus, at one and the same time, it communicates itself to the whole building and its several parts, and at other times confines itself to a single stone, and then the first participation arises from the operations of art, but the second from the formation of nature. And hence body becomes beautiful through the communion supernally proceeding from divinity. But the soul, by her innate power, than which nothing more powerful, in judging its proper concerns, when another soul concurs in the decision, acknowledges the beauty of forms. And perhaps its knowledge in this case arises from its accommodating its internal ray of beauty to form, and trusting to this in its judgment, in the same manner as a rule is employed in the decision of what is straight. But how can that which is inherent in body accord with that which is above body? Let us reply by asking how the architect pronounces the building beautiful by accommodating the external structure to the fabric of his soul. Perhaps because the outward building, when entirely deprived of the stones, is no other than the intrinsic form, divided by the external mass of matter, but indivisibly existing, though appearing in the many. When, therefore, sense beholds the form in bodies, at strife with matter, binding and vanquishing its contrary nature, and sees form gracefully shining forth in other forms, it collects together the scattered whole, and introduces it to itself, and to the indivisible form within, and renders it consonant, congruous, and friendly to its own intimate form. Thus to the good man, virtue shining forth in youth is lovely because consonant to the true virtue, which lies deep in the soul. But the simple beauty of color arises when light, which is something incorporeal, and reason and form, entering the obscure involutions of matter, irradiates and forms its dark and formless nature. It is on this account that fire surpasses other bodies in beauty, because, compared with the other elements, it obtains the order of form. For it is more eminent than the rest, and it is the most subtle of all, bordering, as it were, on an incorporeal nature. And two, that, though impervious itself, it is intimately received by others, for it imparts heat, but admits no cold. Hence it is with the first nature which is ornamented with color, and it is the source of it to others, and on this account it beams forth exalted like some immaterial form. But when it cannot vanquish its subject, as participating but a slender light, it is no longer beautiful, because it does not receive the whole form of color. Again, the music of the voice rouses the harmony latent in the soul, and opens her eye to the perception of beauty, existing in many the same. But it is the property of the harmony perceived by sense to be measured by numbers, yet not in every proportion of number or voice, but in that alone which is obedient to the production and conquest of its species. And this much for the beauties of sense, which, like images and shadows flowing into matter, adorn with spectacles of beauty its formless being, and strike the respective senses with wonder and delight. But it is now time, leaving every object of sense far behind, to contemplate, by a certain ascent, a beauty of a much higher order. A beauty not visible to the corporeal eye, but alone manifest to the brighter eye of the soul, independent of all corporeal aid. However, since without some previous perception of beauty, it is impossible to express by words the beauties of sense, but we must remain in the state of the blind, so neither can we ever speak of the beauty of offices and sciences and whatever is allied to these, if deprived of their intimate possession. Thus we shall never be able to tell of virtue's brightness, unless by looking inward we perceive the fair countenance of justice and temperance, and are convinced that neither the evening nor morning star are half so beautiful and bright. But it is requisite to perceive objects of this kind by that eye by which the soul beholds such real beauties. Besides, it is necessary that whoever perceives this species of beauty should be seized with a much greater delight and a more vehement admiration than any corporeal beauty can excite, as now embracing beauty real and substantial. Such affectations, I say, ought to be excited about true beauty, as admiration and sweet astonishment, desire also and love and a pleasant trepidation. For all souls, as I may say, are affected in this manner about invisible objects, but those the most who have the strongest propensity to their love. As it likewise happens about corporeal beauty, for all equally perceive beautiful corporeal forms, yet all are not equally excited, but lovers in the greatest degree. But it may be allowable to interrogate those who rise above sense concerning the effects of love in this manner. Of such we inquire, what do you suffer respecting fair studies, and beautiful manners, virtuous works, affectations and habits, and the beauty of souls? What do you experience on perceiving yourself lovely within? After what manner are you roused, as it were, to a bacchanalian fury, striving to converse with yourselves and collecting yourselves separate from the impediments of the body? For thus are true lovers enraptured. But what is the cause of these wonderful effects? It is neither figure, nor color, nor magnitude, but soul herself, fair through temperance, and not with the false gloss of color, and bright with the splendors of virtue herself. And this you experience as often as you turn your eye inwards, or contemplate the amplitude of another soul, the just manners, the pure temperance, fortitude venerable by her noble countenance, and modesty and honesty walking with an intrepid step and a tranquil and steady aspect. And what crowns the beauty of them all? Constantly receiving the irradiations of a divine intellect. In what respect, then, shall we call these beautiful? For they are such as they appear, nor did ever anyone behold them, and not pronounce them realities. But as yet, reason desires to know how they cause the loveliness of the soul, and what that grace is in every virtue which beams forth to view like light. Are you then willing we should assume the contrary part, and consider what in the soul appears deformed? For perhaps it will facilitate our search if we can thus find what is base in the soul, and from whence it derives its original. Let us suppose a soul deformed to be one intemperate and unjust, filled with a multitude of desires, a prey to foolish hopes, and vexed with idle fears. Through its diminutive and avaricious nature, the subject of envy, employed solely in thought of what is immoral and low, bound in the fetters of impure delights, living the life, whatever it may be, peculiar to the passions of body, and so totally merged in sensuality as to esteem the base pleasant, and the deformed beautiful and fair. But may we not say that this baseness approaches the soul as an adventitious evil, under the pretext of an adventitious beauty, which with the great detriment renders it impure and pollutes it with much depravity, so that it neither possesses true life nor true sense, but is endued with a slender life through its mixture of evil, and this worn out by the continual depredations of death, no longer perceiving the objects of mental vision, nor permitted any more to dwell with itself, because ever hurried away to things obscure, external, and low? Hence, becoming impure and being on all sides snatched in the unceasing whirl of sensible forms, it is covered with corporeal stains, and wholly given to matter, contracts deeply its nature, loses all its original splendor, and almost changes its own species into that of another, just as the pristine beauty of the most lovely form would be destroyed by its total immersion in mire and clay. But the deformity of the first arises from inward filth, of its own contracting; of the second, from the accession of some foreign nature. If such a one then desires to recover his former beauty, it is necessary to cleanse the infected parts, and thus by a thorough purgation to resume his original form. Hence, then, if we assert that the soul, by her mixture, confusion, and commerce with body and matter, becomes thus base, our assertion will, I think, be right. For the baseness of the soul consists in not being pure and sincere. And as the gold is deformed by the adherence of earthly clods, which are no sooner removed than on a sudden the gold shines forth with its native purity, and then becomes beautiful when separated from natures foreign from its own, and when it is content with its own purity for the possession of beauty, so the soul, when separated from the sordid desires engendered by its too great immersion in body, and liberated from the dominion of every perturbation, can thus, and thus only, blot out the base stains imbibed from its union with body, and thus becoming alone, will doubtless expel all the turpitude contracted from a nature so opposite to its own. Indeed, as the ancient oracle declares, temperance and fortitude, prudence and every virtue are certain purgatives of the soul, and hence the sacred mysteries prophesy obscurely, yet with truth, that the soul not purified lies in Tartarus, immersed in filth. Since the impure is, from his depravity, the friend of filth, as swine, from their sordid body, delight in mire alone. For what else is true temperance than not to indulge in corporeal delights, but to fly from their connection as things which are neither pure nor the offspring of purity? And true fortitude is not to fear death, for death is nothing more than a certain separation of soul from body, and this he will not fear who desires to be alone. Again, magnanimity is the contempt of every mortal concern. It is the wing by which we fly into the regions of the intellect. And lastly, prudence is no other than intelligence, declining subordinate objects, and directing the eye of the soul to that which is immortal and divine. The soul thus defined becomes form and reason, is altogether incorporeal and intellectual, and wholly participates of that divine nature which is the fountain of loveliness, and of whatever is allied to the beautiful and fair. Hence the soul reduced to intellect becomes astonishingly beautiful. For as the lambent flame which appears detached from the burning wood enlightens its dark and smoky parts, so intellect irradiates and adorns the inferior powers of the soul, which without its aid would be buried in the gloom of formless matter. But intellect and whatever emanates from intellect is not the foreign, but the proper ornament of the soul. For the being of the soul, when absorbed in intellect, is then alone real and true. It is therefore rightly said that the beauty and good of the soul consists in her similitude to the deity, for from hence flows all her beauty and her allotment of a better being. But the beautiful itself is that which is called beings, and turpitude is of a different nature, and participates more of non-entity than being. But perhaps the good and the beautiful are the same, and must be investigated by one and the same process, and in like manner the base and the evil. And in the first rank we must place the beautiful, and consider it as the same with the good, from which immediately emanates intellect, as beautiful. Next to this, we must consider the soul receiving its beauty from intellect, and every inferior beauty deriving its origin from the forming power of the soul, whether conversant in fair actions and offices, or sciences and arts. Lastly, bodies themselves participate of beauty from the soul, which, as something divine, and a portion of the beautiful itself, renders whatever it supervenes and subdues beautiful as far as its natural capacity will admit. Let us therefore reascend to the good itself, which every soul desires, and in which it can alone find perfect repose. For if anyone shall become acquainted with this source of beauty, he will then know what I say, and after what manner he is beautiful. Indeed, whatever is desirable is a kind of good, since to this desire tends. But they alone pursue true good, who rise to intelligible beauty, and so far only tend to good itself, as far as they lay aside the deformed divestments of matter with which they become connected in their descent. Just as those who penetrate into the holy retreats of sacred mysteries are first purified and then divest themselves of their garments, until someone by such a process, having dismissed everything foreign from the God, by himself alone beholds the solitary principle of the universe, sincere, simple, and pure, from which all things depend, and to whose transcendent perfections the eyes of all intelligent natures are directed, as the proper cause of being, life, and intelligence. With what ardent love, with what strong desire will he who enjoys this transporting vision be inflamed while vehemently affecting to become one with this supreme beauty? For this it is ordained that he who does not yet perceive him, yet desires him as good. But he who enjoys the vision is enraptured with his beauty, and is equally filled with admiration and delight. Hence such a one is agitated with a salutary astonishment, is affected with the highest and truest love, derides vehement affections and inferior loves, and despises the beauty which he once approved. Such, too, is the condition of those who, on perceiving the forms of gods or daimons, no longer esteem the fairest of corporeal forms. What, then, must be the condition of that being who beholds the beautiful itself? In itself perfectly pure, not confined by any corporeal bond, neither existing in the heavens nor in the earth, nor to be imaged by the most lovely form imagination can conceive, since these are all adventitious and mixed and mere secondary beauties, proceeding from the beautiful itself. If, then, anyone should ever behold that which is the source of munificence to others, remaining in itself while it communicates to all, and receiving nothing because possessing an inexhaustible fullness, and should so abide in the intuition as to become similar to his nature, what more of beauty can such a one desire? For such beauty, since it is supreme in dignity and excellence, cannot fail of rendering its votaries lovely and fair. Add, too, that since the object of contest to souls is the highest beauty, we should strive for its acquisition with unabated ardor, lest we should be deserted of that blissful contemplation which whoever pursues in the right way becomes blessed from the happy vision, and which he who does not obtain is unavoidably unhappy. For the miserable man is not he who neglects to pursue fair colors and beautiful corporeal forms, who is deprived of power and falls from dominion and empire, but he alone who is destitute of this divine possession, for which the ample dominion of the earth and sea and the still more extended empire of the heavens must be relinquished and forgot, if, despising and leaving these far behind, we ever intend to arrive at substantial felicity by beholding the beautiful itself. What measures, then, shall we adopt? What machine employ? Or what reason consult by means of which we may contemplate this ineffable beauty? A beauty abiding in the most divine sanctuary, without ever proceeding from its sacred retreats, lest it should be beheld by the profane and vulgar eye. We must enter deep into ourselves, and leaving behind the objects of corporeal sight, no longer look back after any of the accustomed spectacles of sense. For it is necessary that whoever beholds this beauty should withdraw his view from the fairest corporeal forms, and convinced that these are nothing more than images, vestiges and shadows of beauty, should eagerly soar to the fair original from which they are derived. For he who rushes to these lower beauties, as if grasping realities, when they are only like beautiful images appearing in water, will doubtless, like him in the fable, by stretching after the shadow, sink into the lake and disappear. For by thus embracing and adhering to corporeal forms, he is precipitated, not so much in his body as in his soul, into profound and horrid darkness, and thus blind, like those in the infernal regions. He converses only with phantoms, deprived of the perception of what is real and true. It is here, then, we may more truly exclaim, "Let us depart from hence, and fly to our Father's delightful land." But by what leading stars shall we direct our flight? And by what means avoid the magic power of Circe and the detaining charms of Calypso? For thus the fable of Ulysses obscurely signifies, which feigns him abiding in unwilling exile, though pleasant spectacles were continually presented to his sight, and everything was promised to invite his stay, which can delight the senses and captivate the heart. Like that of Ulysses, is from whence we came, and where our Father lives. But where is the ship to be found by which we accomplish our flight? For our feet are unequal to the task, since they only take us from one part of the earth to another. May we not each of us say, "What ships have I? What sailors to convey? What oars to cut the long, laborious way?" But it is in vain that we prepare horses to draw our ships to transport us to our native land. On the contrary, neglecting all these, as unequal to the task, and excluding them entirely from our view, having now closed the corporeal eye, we must stir up and assume a purer eye within, which all men possess, but which is alone used by a few. What is it, then, this inward eye beholds? Indeed, suddenly raised to an intellectual vision, it cannot perceive an object exceeding bright. The soul must therefore be accustomed to contemplate fair studies, and then beautiful works, not such as arise from the operations of art, but such as are the offspring of worthy men. And next to this, it is necessary to view the soul, which is the parent of this lovely race. But you will ask, after what manner is this beauty of a worthy soul to be perceived? It is thus. Recall your thoughts inward, and if, while contemplating yourself, you do not perceive yourself beautiful, imitate the statuary, who, when he desires a beautiful statue, cuts away at what is superfluous, smooths and polishes what is rough, and never desists until he has given it all the beauty his art is able to effect. In this manner you must proceed, by lopping what is luxuriant, directing what is oblique, and by purgation illustrating what is obscure, and thus continue to polish and beautify your statue until the divine splendor of virtue shines upon you, and temperance, seated in pure and holy majesty, rises to your view. If you become thus purified, residing in yourself, and having nothing any longer to impede this unity of mind, and no farther mixture to be found within, but perceiving yourself to be a true light, and light alone, a light which, though immense, is not measured by any magnitude, nor limited by any circumscribing figure, but is everywhere immeasurable, as being greater than every measure, and more excellent than every quantity. If perceiving yourself thus improved, and trusting solely to yourself as no longer requiring a God, fix now steadfastly your mental view, for with the intellectual eye alone can such immense beauty be perceived. But if your eye is yet infected with any sordid concern, and not thoroughly refined, while it is on the stretch to behold this most shining spectacle, it will be immediately darkened and incapable of intuition, though someone should declare the spectacle present, which it might be otherwise able to discern. For it is here necessary that the perceiver and the thing perceived should be similar to each other before true vision can exist. Thus the sensitive eye can never be able to survey the orb of the sun unless strongly endued with solar fire and participating largely of the vivid ray. Everyone, therefore, must become divine and of godlike beauty before he can gaze upon a god and the beautiful itself. Thus proceeding in the right way of beauty, he will first ascend into the region of intellect, contemplating every fair species, the beauty of which he will perceive to be no other than ideas themselves. For all things are beautiful by the supervening irradiations of these, because they are the offspring and essence of intellect. But that which is superior to these is no other than the fountain of good, everywhere widely diffusing around the streams of beauty, and hence in discourse called the beautiful itself, because beauty is its immediate offspring. But if you accurately distinguish the intelligible objects, you will call the beautiful the receptacle of ideas, but the good itself, which is superior, the fountain and principle of the beautiful. Or you may place the first beautiful and the good in the same principle, independent of the beauty which there subsists. End of Concerning the Beautiful by Plotinus. Translated by Thomas Taylor. Read by Dan Attrell. If you'd like to support more work such as this, please visit patreon.com/themodernhermeticist. And above all, thank you for listening.